he may be thinking that he's going to be saving the world and saving Canada, but Canadians are looking at one thing and one thing only, and it's borne out in the data. They're looking at their bank accounts and they're finding nothing there.
Abacus Data has released new polling that suggests the likelihood of a federal election in 2026 is rising. When you pair that with the latest Consumer Price Index report showing sky-high food prices, it paints a picture of growing public pressure. It may not be long before Canada is quite literally starving for change.
Let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the highlights of the latest Consumer Price Index report, and this just dropped today. So what you can see here is the highlighted yellow bar on this graph, and it is a super high food inflation number of 6.2% since December of last year. That is an insanely high number.
Now, there is something that accounts for the number being high, but I don't know if it accounts for all of it. You see, in December of 2024, that was when the Liberals had pulled their no GST, no HST over the holiday period stunt. So the results that were out today are for December 2025, which compare it to December 2024, where there was no tax on food. Again, I say that it may or may not affect it a lot because most food items in Canada do not have tax on them. So things like fresh and frozen vegetables, fresh and frozen meats, pretty much anything that's not prepared or that's not junk food will not have a tax on it.
Some of the other things to highlight on here: alcoholic beverages, much higher than 12 months ago. And some of the other large bars are comparable with November of 2025 as well in terms of the price increase year over year. This is how it compares across the board. So again, the target inflation rate for the Bank of Canada is around 2%. And you can see that Canada is a little higher than that, but it's not above the 3% on the aggregate. But we can see that in Manitoba that it's actually at 3.7% compared to last year in December, which is out of that target range, along with Quebec, along with New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador. You have some of the other provinces that are dragging the overall average down, which, you can see that in British Columbia and in Prince Edward Island of November of 2025.
Grocery prices continue upward trend. Despite being unchanged month over month, prices for food purchased from stores rose 5% year over year in December. Coffee was up 30.8%, and fresh or frozen beef was up 16.8%, which remained the largest contributors to the increase.
So that portion of the CPI report is excluding restaurants. The restaurants were somewhere, I think, around 8.5%. So even excluding the restaurant portion of this, food is going up at an incredible rate. And you don't need me to tell that. All of you already know this. And I know you're sitting there saying, yes, we've noticed that. And we have less and less money in our bank account as a result of that. But this, again, all comes back to Mark Carney's jetting all over the world, signing these trade deals, and he's trying to get all these headlines and make Canadians believe that everything's going to be better. The problem is none of this is having any net effect on Canada's pocketbooks. And this is what Canadians are seeing. Now, this brings us to the next portion of the video, where back in November of 2025, we had taken the position that the Conservatives and the NDP and Quebec, or the Bloc, needed the budget to pass, because if they didn't pass that budget and it went to an election, things would have been pretty bleak for them. And in November, only about 50% of Canadians were in favor of having an election back then. And that's a pretty bad flip of the coin at that point. And our position is That's with no narrative. So if the narrative was actually on the side of the government saying, hey, listen, we were just elected not even a year ago, and all of these opposition parties are not letting us build Canada, we can't even exercise our mandate, we surmise that it would probably have gone to a majority government. And many of the people that we've talked to inside the political arena agreed with that. So what does that look like now? Well, according to the latest Abacus poll, which was completed on January 14th of this year, 67% of Canadians are now in favor of going to an election if it produced a majority government that could provide more political stability in Canada. Now, what's interesting is the same question was asked where it produced a majority Mark Carney government that could provide more political stability in Canada. And that number drops from 67% down to 50%. So that's interesting to me.
Now, that's not really uncommon when you have these kind of vague questions like if Canada were to get a majority government that could help produce political stability, would you be in favor of an election? So you have liberals thinking, oh, yeah, if Mark Carney was in a majority government, absolutely, I would vote for that. And you have conservatives thinking, yes, if Pierre Poilievre was in a majority government, then absolutely, I would want that. But when you actually specify, it comes down. And we see the exact same thing when leadership races are occurring. The party itself that is in the leadership race, they typically have higher rating. And then once the leader is chosen, it goes down a little bit.
Now, this is where the numbers get interesting. So this is, again, diving deeper into the numbers of Canadians that support a federal election that could result in a majority government. So look at the 18 to 29-year-olds. There is a very large amount of them that want an election. So you see that strongly supporting that is 36%, and 43% are saying that they would support one. So that's almost 80% of youth want an election right now. And that's pretty bad news for Mark Carney, because a lot of those have indicated that they would actually vote for Conservative. And you can also see that the 30 to 44 and the 45 to 59 and the 60 and over range are about the same. So it's interesting to see those numbers there. And it's almost the same across the board when you're looking at provinces and when you're looking, at the Liberal or Conservative parties. Now, when you look at the NDP, it is not surprising that they don't want an election right now. Why? Because they have no leader right now.
Right.
So I expect to see that go up after there is a leadership race concluding. So it'd be interesting to see these numbers change once the NDP has selected their leader. And it'll also be interesting to see the actual polling for the parties change, because you may have people voting Liberal or indicating they're going to vote Liberal just because there is no NDP leader. So they've said, well, I don't know, so I'm not even going to bother because I don't know who's going to be the leader. So that's going to be interesting to see. But let's continue. Top 3 priorities for federal government right now, according to Canadians. Overwhelmingly, 60% is the cost of living. The economy, 42%. Healthcare, 37%. And Donald Trump slips all the way down to 4th at 35%. So it's no wonder that you see the youth vote really, really high, because again, they're stuck living in mom and dad's basements. They're stuck having to borrow money for food. They're stuck without a job because all the Carney government seems to care about is jetting all over the world and not actually providing jobs for our new generation entering the workforce.
Well, and I think that's why I'm a little bit surprised, honestly, to see immigration and housing so low on the list. They rank lower than Canadians' concerns regarding Donald Trump. And I think our younger generation, who is in university, just getting out of school, trying to start a family, trying to find a place to live, they're having the worst time of everybody. And again, I'm just surprised that those 2 issues were so low on the list, because I think especially for young people, they're very important.
Who is optimistic about the direction of the country? Now, I don't know about you folks, but my eyes were drawn immediately to the bottom right part of the page, because if you're liberal, 60% of liberals are saying everything's great, but look at the difference between the folks that are ideologically captured by the liberals and literally everybody else. The NDP, 39, Bloc, 14, Conservative, 16. 18 to 29-year-olds, 37%. 60 and over, 40%. BC, 42%. Everyone's happy out in BC, apparently, according to versus the rest of Canada. And then Atlantic Canada at 46%. Everybody else is under 40%, and in some cases under 30%.
Well, and if you look at Canada as a whole, it's 35%, which is just above half of what the Liberals are saying. If you ask me, that's because our mainstream media is constantly pushing narratives about how good Mark Carney is doing, and look at this trade deal, and look at that, and he's going to India next, and look at how amazing. We know it's not true.
The other thing to consider in that, and this rebuts the narrative of it's all boomers that are voting for the Liberals. If it was all boomers voting for the Liberals, you would see the 60 and over much higher in terms of the optimism for Canada. And it's not. So the fact that you see the Liberals at 60%, but the boomers essentially similar to everybody else, that just shows that there's a large swath of that demographic of the 60 and olders that don't like Mark Carney, that don't think that he's doing a good idea or doing a good job. And it probably shows that there's a bunch of Liberal supporters of the last election that are no longer Liberal supporters right now. Now, a lot of people are probably wondering, okay, that's great. These metrics are fine. What is the overall picture? So this is what the Abacus poll ended up finding. You have 40% Liberal, 40% Conservative, and they each lost a point in the poll since December 9th, where they were at 41-41. And what does that map out to? So this is Real Albanian Pat, who modeled out this poll. And according to him, the Conservatives gained 8 seats. The Liberals lost 15 seats. Bloc goes up by 6. NDP goes up by 1. So this is movement in the direction that we need it to go. So we're getting there. And we need more and more folks in the GTA to move over. Now, it is going to be interesting to see what the polls are going to say since this China deal. That's what I'm interested to see across Ontario, because if things go the way that we surmise and things go the way that we hope they will, is nothing's probably going to change out west. And I'm sure a lot of people out west are saying, darn right, nothing's going to change out here in the polls. But we may see some movement in Ontario. Doug Ford finally criticizing Mark Carney. Doug Ford finally indicting him and saying, I thought this was a partnership, and I was left out of the big kids table and no one talked to me and blah, 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 blah. And everyone's saying, duh, Doug, this is what we've been saying to you. But also, this is what we were saying before. Doug Ford needed a boogeyman in Ottawa so he could blame for everything going wrong in Ontario.
Well, and I expect to see the Golden Horseshoe, especially where there are several automotive plants, to turn blue. I mean, we've heard that particular union members are telling their executive, hey, you told us to vote Liberal in the last election, and look where that got us. A bunch of us could be losing our jobs.
Right. So this is going to be really interesting to see how the rolling polls end up playing out over the next month or so. And as we get closer to this NDP leadership race, it's going to be interesting to see how Canadians react to these alleged moves and alleged deals by Mark Carney, because he may be thinking that he's going to be saving the world and saving Canada, but Canadians are looking at one thing and one thing only, and it's borne out in the data. They're looking at their bank accounts and they're finding nothing there. And Mark Carney may find the same thing when he enters the next election.